The Center of Everything by Laura Moriarty. Narrated by Julie Dretzen.
Chapter 1. Ronald Reagan is on television, giving a speech because he wants to be president. He has the voice of a nice person, and something in his hair makes it shiny under the lights. I changed the channel, but it's still him, just from a different angle. The people in the audience wear cowboy hats with Reagan printed on the front, and they clap and blow horns every time he stops talking, so much that sometimes he has to put his hands up so they'll be quiet and hear what he's going to say next. Nancy Reagan sits behind him, smiling and wearing a peach-colored dress with a bow on one of the shoulders. No cowboy hat. She claps too, but only after everyone else has started, so it looks like while he's talking, she is maybe thinking about something else. "She's a mannequin," my mother says, pointing a spatula at the television. "She freaks me out." My mother is maybe the opposite of Nancy Reagan. I could never imagine her wearing the peach dress with the bow on it because she wears blue jeans and usually her gray sweatshirt. And she always listens to what everyone says, even people sitting in the next booth in restaurants who probably don't want her to listen. Right now, she's supposed to be in the kitchen, making us grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, but she came out to the front room when she heard Ronald Reagan's voice. Now she's just standing there with the spatula, looking at the television and shaking her head until I can smell smoke coming from the kitchen, the bread starting to burn. She smells it too, runs back. "Zing," she says. When she kisses me sometimes, she says, "Smack." The people listening to Ronald Reagan in the audience yell, "Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!" and wave their cowboy hats at the camera as it moves around the room. Finally, Ronald Reagan laughs and says, "I think you're playing our song." And this just makes people yell more. My grandmother Eileen was here last week, and she said she remembered back when Ronald Reagan was an actor in movies. So handsome you'd faint if you ever got the chance to see him up close. She's worried about him being president, though, because his middle name is Wilson, which means he has 6 letters in each of his 3 names, and if you've read Revelations, that alone is enough to give you the shivers. But she's going to vote for him anyway, because she says he's the one person who can maybe make everything right again, and he's not afraid of the communists. Really, she says, the grand finale is coming one way or another, through him or through somebody else. The important thing is to be ready. My mother says not to listen to Eileen about things like this. 6 is just a number, she says, bigger than 5, smaller than 7, and there are enough real reasons to worry about Ronald Reagan without bringing in imaginary ones. "What's he saying now?" she yells. She's standing on top of a chair, waving a dish towel in front of the smoke detector. But I can't talk and listen at the same time, so I just listen. And Ronald Reagan says God put America between 2 oceans on purpose, to help the freedom fighters in Afghanistan and the Christians and Jews behind the Iron Curtain. I don't understand this, how a curtain can be iron. There was a metal fold-out wall between our classrooms last year at school. Usually it was shut, but when Mrs. West or Mrs. Blackmore was sick, the one who wasn't sick could unhook the latch and push it back so it folded up and we would all just be in one big room together. "No," my mother says. "Iron Curtain is a figure of speech. There's not really a curtain anywhere." She brings the grilled cheese sandwiches out on a plate, burned on the edges but still okay to eat, one of her long red hairs in the melted cheese of mine. Sorry, she says, picking it out. "It won't kill you." Ronald Reagan says he wants everyone to begin this crusade joined together in a moment of silence. And really, you know, he means praying to God. The people in cowboy hats take them off and bow their heads, but my mother keeps eating her sandwich. She doesn't like Ronald Reagan because she thinks he'll get us all blown up with nuclear bombs. She says all somebody has to do is get mad and push a button, and we'll all be dead within half an hour. All the houses melted, the whales cooked in the sea, and Eileen can think she'll hear angels singing all she wants, but really she won't be able to hear a damn thing because she'll be just as dead as everybody else. She says she used to not worry so much about things like this, but now she has me, and the idea of somebody pushing this button makes her crazy, makes her scared when she hears even an airplane in the sky. I tell her if we had half an hour, we could go downstairs the way we do when the tornado sirens go off. We don't have our own basement, but there's a storage space underneath our apartment building, and my mother has a key. There would even be enough time to go outside and wave people down on the highway, tell them they better get inside. I would stay outside until I could see the missiles, and then I would run back and have my mother shut the door behind me. My mother says no, Evelyn. It wouldn't work like that. A nuclear bomb would blow up the basement, too. Just one bomb in Wichita or even Kansas City would be enough to get us, even all the way out here. If the bombs start going off, they'll get everyone, she says. It'll be curtains for us all. But the next time Eileen is here, she says, yes, Evelyn, sometimes it does work like that. Whenever a lot of people get killed, there are always a few people who don't. We are sitting at the kitchen table, Eileen and I, eating the barbecued ribs she brought with her from Wichita. She says when she was a little girl in Alabama, a tornado came, and her family lived while other families died. She had been standing outside looking up at the sky as it got darker, feeling the raindrops turn into tiny balls of hail that stung when they landed on the backs of her arms. And then she looked up and saw a cloud turning over on itself and filling up the sky, like smoke coming out the windows of a burning building. And then a man not wearing any shoes blew right past her, his feet not touching the ground, his legs moving like he was riding a bicycle. He looked at me, Eileen says. He looked right into my eyes. She turned and saw the funnel then, dark and thin like a snake. Her father grabbed her around the waist and carried her down to the cellar, and he kept his arms tight around her and her mother while the house rattled and shook over their heads. It sounded like a train, Eileen says, just like a train going right over us. My mother rolls her eyes and says that's what everyone always says about tornadoes. She's standing behind Eileen doing dishes. She won't eat the ribs with us. She doesn't eat meat since she started working at Peterson's. Eileen says maybe because that's exactly what tornadoes sound like, and when it was over, she and her father and mother came out to nothing but quiet, and already the sun was shining through the clouds. The air was pale green, she says, the color of the ocean, and she could see the flying man's shoeless feet sticking straight up out of the ground, as if he had dived into the earth. Eileen's neighbors died too. They had 2 daughters. Before the tornado, Eileen played with one of the daughters, but not the other one because she was special and couldn't walk. When the tornado came, they went down to their basement too, carried the special daughter with them, but even so, the whole family, even the chickens they kept in the yard if you want to count them, ended up dead, sucked up into the funnel or crushed under the ceiling of their cellar with their hands on top of their heads. Eileen cries when she gets to this part of the story. Gates were on the right, she says, her small hands pressed together, pointing to her right. And the Braggs were on the left. She points to her left. But when we came out, it was just us. Our house wasn't even touched. I try to imagine it, a tornado hopping over her house at just the right moment, like a skip in a record. You were lucky, Eileen. She shakes her head, wiping her eyes. Not lucky, Evelyn. We were spared. My mother turns around so only I can see her face and puts her soapy hands around her own throat, sticking her tongue out to one side like she's choking. Eileen is somehow able to see her doing this, though she does not turn her head. Think what you like, Tina, she says, picking her rib back up, her eyes already dry again. Think what you like. My mother doesn't like cigarettes, so Eileen has to go outside and sit on the front step when she wants to smoke. She smokes Virginia Slims out of the right side of her mouth because the left side doesn't move. Something's wrong with it. When she's happy, only the right side of her mouth goes up, and it looks as if she's making a funny face. She's only 45, and she says as much as she loves me. She doesn't feel like a grandmother yet. This is why I call her Eileen. I go outside with her sometimes, and she tells me that the real problem with my mother is that she believes everything she sees. But really, Eileen says, they can put anything on television these days. There are pictures of astronauts standing on the moon, but they have been faked by the government, and if you look closely, you can tell. There aren't even any stars in the background, but people are just too stupid to notice. The scientists want us to think they know more than they really do, but really, the stars are where the angels live, and also a way for God to see you, even at night. If you do something wrong, or even think it, He'll know. She wants us to come visit her in Wichita sometime, to come with her to her church. But we have never gone, and when Eileen isn't there to listen, my mother says it's because one crazy person in my life is enough. I don't need to meet the people from Eileen's church. But when my mother isn't there to listen, Eileen says, yes, actually, I do. When we're outside on the step, she lowers her voice so my mother can't hear what she's saying and tells me I have to believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins even before I was around to make them. She says it's very important that I believe this all the time, every single second of the day, because if I'm a believer when I die, I will go to heaven. But if I die a doubter, I will go to hell, and I will be on fire for the rest of everything. If I am walking down the street and I start to doubt just a little, if I just start to wonder if Jesus and heaven is a story that somebody made up, and a bus comes around the corner and hits me before I'm a believer again, too bad. She says she loves me so much that she can't stand to think of this happening to me, so it's very important that I always believe and never doubt. What about my mother? I ask. What will happen to her? Eileen frowns, taking a drag off her cigarette. She'll go to hell, honey, if she keeps making fun. I know it's sad, but those are the rules. Men like my mother. They run after her with socks if she drops them from the laundry basket, and they dig into their pockets and wallets for change when we run short in the checkout line at the store. The bag boys are only in high school, but they found out her name. When we go through the line, they smile and say, "Hi, Tina." She is almost beautiful, her eyes large and blue like Eileen's, and so many straight white teeth in her smile. But she's got a bad nose. It's thin like Eileen's, but longer, with a bump, like someone tried to pick her up by it before she was done drying. She sometimes looks cross-eyed, both eyes maybe trying to see over the bump. But she also makes herself cross-eyed on purpose when she's telling a joke, and she does it slowly, so it's difficult to tell where being cross-eyed for real stops and where the joke starts. And this makes her funny, I think. People laugh more at her jokes than they would if somebody else said the same thing. I have a normal nose, without the bump, but I have to wear glasses, and underneath them my eyes are brown and turned downward, drooping, so I look like I'm sad or tired even when I'm not. Brad Browning at school has asked me, "Why are you always so sleepy, Evelyn? Why don't you just take a nap?" But my mother says she thinks sad, sleepy eyes are pretty. She crosses her eyes and says, "Let's just say if your father didn't have sad brown eyes, you probably wouldn't be here today." But I don't think most people think sad-looking eyes are pretty. Brad Browning says I look like the plastic basset hounds at grocery stores that you can put quarters in to give money to the Humane Society. There's a chance I could grow up to be ugly, and this is one of many things I worry about. My mother works at Peterson's Pet Food, right across from the slaughterhouse on Highway 59. Her boss at Peterson's is Mr. Mitchell, And he's also her friend, even though he's old. My mother says his hair is salt and pepper, not gray, and she thinks he's still handsome. Don't call him old, she says. 2 of Mr. Mitchell's fingernails are purple, with some of the nail missing and yellow where the white should be. My mother says this happened when Denise Fishbone, the knucklehead, got her hair caught in the grinder, and Mr. Mitchell reached in and yanked it out, just in time. He saved her, she says. Saved her life. 2 more seconds and she would have been a goner. She drags a red fingernail across her neck, making a slicing sound, her eyes bulging. Mr. Mitchell saved us, too. When the bus service got canceled, he gave us a car. Just like that. He said it was just sitting there anyway, making his yard look trashy and his wife mad. But when he first drove it over to give to us, my mother didn't believe it. She stood in the doorway, watching his face. You're going to give me a car? For free? He smiled, first at her and then down at me. I've got the new truck now, so I don't really need it. He held out the key in one of his big hands. It's the trickle-down theory, Tina. Embrace it. For a moment, my mother did not move. She only looked at him, as if she were waiting for something else, some more information. And then she leaned forward quickly and kissed him on his forehead, her hands in his salt and pepper hair. This is unbelievable, she yelled, running to the Volkswagen. Too good to be true. Exactly, Tina, he said, laughing now, walking behind her. I might just be giving you a headache. It's an old car. It's got some problems. No. She rolled down the window as soon as she got inside, waving us over. Come on, both of you, let's go for a ride. So we did. We drove up and down the highway, the 3 of us, Frank Sinatra tape in the stereo. Mr. Mitchell sat in the passenger seat, telling my mother when to shift. When she went too fast, the car would shimmy back and forth, and Mr. Mitchell would turn around and look at me like he was scared. But really, I knew he wasn't. The Volkswagen is okay from the outside, but on the inside, it's no good. There's an alarm that's supposed to tell us that our seatbelts aren't on, and since there aren't any seatbelts anymore, the alarm stays on all the time. This sound makes me crazy. Also, the stereo is broken. The Frank Sinatra tape is stuck inside it, and the off switch doesn't work, so when the car starts, the stereo comes on automatically and it can play only that tape. You can't even turn it down. Well, my mother says, you get what you get. I liked the Frank Sinatra songs at first, but now I'm sick of them. I'm sick of love and marriage, sick of witchcraft, sick of 3 coins in the fountain. I tell my mother I'm so tired of Frank Sinatra that if I saw him walking down the street, I would turn around and run the other way. She rolls down her window and asks if I would like some cheese to go with my wine. Beggars can't be choosers, she says. We need this car. It's true. We live just off the side of the highway in an apartment complex called Tree Line Colonies. 4 flat-roofed, black and brown units of 8 apartments each, 63 miles from Wichita, 3 miles from Kerrville. There aren't any sidewalks, and even if there were, there wouldn't be anywhere to walk on them. My mother says the rent is cheap at Tree Line Colonies because they were going to put more buildings around it and then somebody lost all their money and that was the end of that. There are 4 units in Tree Line Colonies, A, B, C, and D. We live in Unit C. People on the upper floors get a balcony, but we don't. My mother says balconies are just something to fall off of. She says she can see where they get the colony part of Tree Line Colonies, because that's exactly what it feels like. Colony out in the middle of nowhere, waiting for reinforcements. She doesn't see where they got the tree line, though, because there aren't any trees except for the 2 red buds in front of Unit A that still need to be propped up with string and sticks. But I'm starting to see that things get named wrong all the time. Rhode Island, for instance. Indians. There's a strip mall in Kerrville called Pine Ridge Shopping Plaza, but there aren't any pines, and there isn't a ridge. "See, Evelyn?" my mother asks. She has to yell so I can hear her over Frank Sinatra. "See? You never can tell what your luck is. The bus gets canceled, so then somebody gives us a car. A bad thing turns into a good thing, just like that." She snaps her fingers. Just like that. But the Volkswagen always breaks down, so much that when the tow truck men get out of their trucks now, they smile and say, "Hi, Tina." Mr. Mitchell has to give my mother rides home from work in his big red truck, and when I get home from school, he's still there, standing in back of the Volkswagen, looking down at the engine with his arms crossed. He says that cars are like people, and you have to get to know them before you can fix them. He talks about the Volkswagen as if it is a person, a woman, with feelings that can be hurt. "Let's see what's troubling her, Squirrel," he says to me. But really this is all he does. I think maybe he's afraid to touch the engine, with 2 of his fingernails already gone. And then my mother makes sandwiches or spaghetti and we all 3 sit out on the step and eat it, looking at the car. Mr. Mitchell likes to do tricks for me, like pretending he can pull his thumb off with one hand, then put it back on. I'm too old for this. I know his thumb is really tucked behind his hand, but things can look one way and be another, depending on where you're standing. On our way to the grocery store one afternoon, the numbers on the dash turned to 250,000 miles. Frank Sinatra is singing, "You Make Me Feel So Young," and my mother says, "Isn't that a coincidence?" But maybe now, finally, the Volkswagen has had enough. My mother has to use both hands to pull the stick shift, and when we stop at red lights, it takes too long to get it back into first. On a cold and rainy day in late April, the gear sticks for too long, and when people start honking, she gets out of the car, her arms straight above her head, and yells, "Shut up! Just shut the fuck up! I'm doing the best I can!" She says fuck right in front of me. When she gets back in the car, she looks like a crazy woman, her curly hair flying all around her. The man at the garage says a new clutch is going to cost $350, and that's just the beginning. There's also the transmission. At home, she sits at the kitchen table, making long lists of numbers on yellow notebook paper, subtracting and adding, rubbing her eyes. "Why don't you ask Eileen for money?" I ask. "She'll give it to you." She looks at me, and now there's nothing funny about her face. She tells me no one ever just gives anyone anything. She tells me to go to bed. The next time Eileen comes over, she brings a strawberry jelly roll, so buttery and sugary I tell her I'm going to pass out from happiness when I take a bite. I pretend to faint and lie down on the floor, shaking for a moment, and then lying still. Eileen thinks this is funny, but my mother is too worried about the $350 and has not laughed at anything all day. Eileen is almost out the door when my mother finally asks. Instead of answering yes or no, she comes back in and sits down at the table across from my mother, her arms folded in her lap. "He sees my checkbook, Tina." "Can't you just make something up?" Eileen stares at my mother for a moment, like she's waiting for my mother to laugh, or at least smile. When she doesn't, Eileen looks down at her hands and shakes her head. "If you want his money, you're going to have to come see him. That's reasonable. That's fair." They're talking about my grandfather. He doesn't visit us. I've never met him. My mother takes her plate to the sink and turns on the water. Eileen stares and stares, but still my mother won't say anything else. It's mean to do this, to pretend someone isn't there when they are. "You know, Tina, most people don't go giving money to daughters who don't talk to them." My mother comes back over to the table to get my plate, not looking at Eileen. You going to ask her father for the money, Tina? Eileen tilts her head at me. Do you even know where he is? My mother says nothing to this either, and she gets a very serious look on her face. She bends down and looks under the table and up at the ceiling. She peers into the hallway. No, now that you mention it, she says, scratching her head. She looks at me. Oh my God, where is he? Finally, for the first time all night, she's smiling. It's just a joke. The sad-eyed man who was my father left 2 months before I was even born. There's no way he's under the table. I laugh, but this time Eileen doesn't. She stands up to leave again, picking up her keys. He'll give you the money, Tina, she says. You just have to ask. The only good thing about tree-lined colonies is the flat roof. There's a stairway in the back of the building and a door that opens to the roof. But my mother says this door is for maintenance men who know what they're doing and not 10-year-old girls who don't know what it's like to fall 3 stories off a roof and have their heads go splat on the pavement. But I like to go up there in the evening, watching the sky turn from blue to pink to violet, seeing the first twinkling stars of night. I just did a report on Venus at school, so I know where it is in the sky. It's the closest planet, made up mostly of vaporous gases. Miss Fairchild says that no one could live on Venus. It's covered with clouds. The clouds are poisonous, and the poison would kill you as soon as you breathed it. Anyway, it's too hot. The stars are balls of hydrogen and helium and fire, just like our sun, and no one could live there either. Miss Fairchild says people used to think the Earth was flat, with an edge you could fall off of. They thought the sky was just a big dome, and that the sun moved across it every day, pulled by a man with a chariot. It's easy to look back now and say, oh, you dummies. But when I'm up on the roof, watching the sun disappear behind the fields on the other side of the highway, I can see how they would think that. If everybody I ever met told me the Earth was flat, and that somebody pulled the sun across the sky with a chariot, and nobody told me anything else, I would have believed them. Or, if no one would have told me anything and I had to come up with an idea myself, I would have thought that the sun went into a giant slot in the earth at night, like bread into a toaster. I watch the cars on the highway, their red taillights getting brighter as the sky grows dark. 2 deer move quickly through the corn, just their ears showing over the green stalks. There are more deer out now that it's spring. Sometimes they try to cross the highway. I saw one get hit by a car last year. The police came and took the body away, and Eileen said they were going to sell it to people who would eat it. A dark line of blood stayed on the road until it rained. I hear my mother's voice from below. I know you're up there, Evelyn. You've got 2 minutes to get back in here. 2 minutes. When I get down, I find her back in her bedroom, lying on her stomach, reading a book. She used to just watch television after dinner, falling asleep on the green couch and then waking up again to ask me what time it was. But now she says she's tired of watching television and letting her brain turn to mush. Last week, she went to the library and checked out a stack of books, and now she falls asleep while she's reading. She's still on the first one, The Grapes of Wrath, and she says it isn't nearly as bad as it was when she had to read it in high school. But of course, then she was busy getting pregnant. She had all the wrath she needed. Ha ha. I don't want you on the roof, she says. How many times do I have to tell you? Okay. You could really hurt yourself. You go up there again and I'll ground you. No TV, no radio. Okay. I say this in a mean way. She's bugging me. Okay then, do you want to get your homework and bring it in here? I did it at school. She rolls her eyes. Of course you did. I crawl up on the bed next to her. I'm not supposed to read over her shoulder because I read more quickly than she does, and it makes her mad when I get to the end of the page and look up and hum, waiting for her to turn it. Mom? Yes? Are we going to be able to fix the car? She squints, but does not look up from the book. I don't know. Are we going to Wichita to get the money from your dad? I'm kicking my feet up and down on the bed. She crosses her leg over mine, makes me stop. I don't know, she says. What happened to Eileen's mouth? She married my father, she says quickly, half smiling like it's a joke she just made up. But even as she says it, her voice trails off, catches at the end. She looks up from her book, her eyes on mine. He hit her? She nods. A long time ago, yes. Why? I'm not sure. I wasn't there. She shuts the book with her finger inside it to mark the place, waiting. And this means I can ask whatever else I want. I know I want to know something, but I can't think of how to ask it. I know you'd have to hit someone pretty hard to do that to somebody's mouth. You'd have to be really mad. I've been that mad. I wanted to hit Brad Browning last week. He was standing right in front of me, smiling, and he wouldn't stop saying mean things, and I could feel my hand ball up in a fist. It was like electricity, lifting my arm up for me. And then Miss Fairchild was behind us, calling us in from recess. Maybe it was like this. Maybe Eileen was saying something bad to my grandfather over and over again, and no one was standing behind him, telling him it was time to go back in. Chapter 2. When I get home from school the next day, my mother tells me we're going to Wichita. We're just going for dinner. She's brushing her teeth, hard and fast, looking at me in the mirror. She looks right at my eyes, knows where they are even though it's just a reflection. We'll be back by 8. She spits and rinses, turns around. Do I look okay? I tell her yes, though I'm not sure this is true. She's wearing a yellow dress with a high collar, a slip underneath it. She isn't wearing makeup, and her curly hair is pulled back with 2 of my barrettes. I like her better the other way, in the gray sweatshirt, or when she's dressed up with lipstick that matches her clothes. She makes me change into a pink dress that I hate, a present from Eileen from last Christmas. It itches, and I know I look stupid. When it's time to go, I run to the Volkswagen with my head down, my arms in front of my face. Mr. Rowley is outside, sitting in a lawn chair in front of Unit B. Kevin and Travis Rowley stand in front of him. They're playing some kind of game, taking turns throwing a white-handled knife in between each other's feet, their legs spread wide. Kevin and Travis are usually fighting. Although knife throwing is just a game, fighting is real. Yesterday I saw Travis running out the Rowleys' door, a magazine tucked under his arm, Kevin running right after him, yelling, "You shit! You little shit!" and grabbing Travis's ankle just as he started to jump down the stairs. Travis went flying forward, his ankle still in Kevin's hand, his head and arms falling on the concrete with a smack that I could hear even through my window. They rolled over each other for a while, their hands on each other's necks, until Mr. Rowley came out and told them to knock it off. When they got up, there was blood on the sidewalk, and Kevin had the magazine. Today, when they see me, they stop throwing the knife. Both of them look at Mr. Rowley. "Well, hello there, little Evelyn," Mr. Rowley calls out. "What a nice dress. Where's your pretty mother?" Mr. Rowley always wants to know where my mother is. "Don't tell him," she says. "Don't say anything." So I go to the car without saying anything and wait for her to come out. Mr. Rowley stands up, watching our door. He's in love with my mother, but not in a good way. He used to be drunk most of the time, and sometimes he would fall asleep on our front step instead of in his own house. I would have to step over him in the morning, and even then he would wake up and move his mouth like there was a lemon inside it and say, "Oh, Evelyn, where's your pretty mother?" The Rowleys moved here last year from Wisconsin, and Mr. Rowley said he made steel there until one day he went to work and there was a padlock on the door. He used to have a t-shirt that said, Men of Steel, Wisconsin Steel, but he doesn't have it anymore because he set it on fire. I saw him do it. He was barbecuing out on their balcony, and all of a sudden he took the shirt off and squirted lighter fluid on it and then got out a match. The shirt went poof into a bright little ball, and he threw it off the balcony down onto the parking lot. No one's car was there, but he didn't look to see either way before he threw it. He stopped drinking last year because of AA, and he doesn't sleep on our step or set things on fire anymore, but he still wants to know where my mother is. Sometimes when she walks out to the Volkswagen in the parking lot, he whistles at her or growls like a tiger, limping along beside her, even though she won't look at him, and she's a fast walker, so it's hard for him to keep up. My mother says we can never, ever make fun of Mr. Rowley's limp, even though he's a pain in the butt, because that happened to him in Vietnam when he was only 18 years old. But, she says, we don't have to talk to him either. He has a tattoo on his shoulder, a picture of a dancing naked lady with breasts like staring eyeballs. Carmen, written underneath in blurring blue letters. Mrs. Rowley's name is Becky. She's very thin, and she wears eyeglasses with a gold chain that loops down on each side of her face. She's not a very nice person. I don't have to see her so much, except when she's walking their poodle, Jackie O, and then she does not say hello but just stands there, watching me like she's a frog and I'm a fly, and if I get too close to her, that's it. She will not let me pet Jackie O because she says Jackie has a nervous condition that I will only aggravate. But I think Mrs. Rowley is the one with the nervous condition. She leans her head over their balcony sometimes and says, Please don't jump rope on the pavement because I can hear the skip, 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 and it's very annoying. I tell my mother when Mrs. Rowley was little, someone must have told her, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Only she got confused. Got it backwards. Only talk if you're going to say something mean. My mother says, oh well, Mrs. Rowley has problems of her own. My mother also says it's unfortunate the way Mr. Rowley acts toward women, not just because he's married, but because he's the father of 2 growing boys, and you can already see where that's going. Kevin Rowley is in 8th grade, and already he tries to whistle at her the way his father does. One time when he did it, my mother said, What a good little parrot. Want a cracker? But the younger one, Travis, doesn't ever whistle. Every time I see him, he's biting his bottom lip like he's either mad or trying not to say what he's thinking. He's in 5th grade, 1 grade above me. We ride the same bus, but he's only talked to me 1 time. Last year there was a contest at school to see who could do multiplication and division tables the fastest. Each teacher picked the best math person out of their class by playing Around the World, which means whoever is sitting in one of the corners in the front row stands up next to the person behind them, and the teacher asks something like, 12 times 8? Whoever answers first wins and gets to go on to the next person, and if you beat everybody in the room, 1 by 1, then you've gone around the world and you're the winner. I won out of my class, but I also got in trouble, and Miss Farrow said I would be disqualified if I kept getting excited and yelling out the answers so loud it hurt her ears. Calm down, Evelyn, she said. It's math. The right answer is the right answer, whether you yell it or not. After lunch, I got to go down to the library to do Around the World against all the people who won out of their homerooms, and Travis Rowley was there. I was thinking it wasn't very fair that I had to go against 4th and 5th graders, but they weren't as fast as you would think. I got in trouble for yelling again, but I went almost all the way around the world again until I got to Travis, who you wouldn't think would be very smart, only reading comic books and throwing knives around with his brother. But he was. We kept tying. He did not yell out the answers the way I did, but he said them very quickly, somehow pushing the right answers out of his mouth while still biting his bottom lip. He kept his thumbs hooked in the front pockets of his jeans and looked down at his shoes the whole time, and I could hear him, like a softer echo of my own voice, his voice muffled, hard to hear. 63. 144. 6. 32. 7. 49. After a while, Mr. Leland, the principal, stopped looking down at his cards and just asked us whatever came into his head, his eyes shifting between Travis's mouth and mine. 6 times 12. 54 divided by 6. 84 divided by 12. 6 times 7. 3 times 11. And we just kept going and going and going. Mr. Leland told me that I could hold on to the table in front of me if that would help me not jump or clap every time I answered. He told Travis he would have to speak up, and he told me to be a little more quiet. "Calm down, honey," he said. "It's just a game." But by then I couldn't calm down because more than anything I like to win things, and it didn't seem fair that I could beat everybody else and then still not win just because of one person. If you don't win things, you lose them. And I think the way I feel when I lose must be the way it feels to be dead. So I was thinking about winning, how much I wanted to win, clenching my hands so tightly my fingers hurt. And that's when Mr. Leland said, 39 divided by 3. And Travis won. I didn't know the 13s at all. We hadn't even done them yet. All he got was a piece of paper that said he won, and Mr. Leland shaking his hand. Sort of smiled when he got the paper. Then he just went right back to biting his bottom lip. I was mad, looking at the piece of paper I almost got but didn't. And then Travis turned around and said, "Nice job, kiddo." And even though this is all he has ever said to me and all he probably will ever say to me my entire life, I felt better. I've never seen him say that much to anyone. He shoplifts. A month ago, there was a police cruiser parked outside of Unit B, and I saw him getting out of the back, wearing a sweatshirt hood over his head, but you could still see it was him because he has curly brown hair that my mother calls corkscrews. No one else I know has it. So now, twice a week, the school bus drops Travis Rowley off at the group home for boys in town instead of at our stop. He's still doing it, though, shoplifting. Last week I saw him in the quick shop when I was with my mother, his hands moving quickly, pushing 2 comic books into the sleeves of the blue sweatshirt. He reads these comic books on the bus, a ski hat pulled down over his hair. They're mostly comic books with covers of superheroes in masks and colorful bodysuits, swinging from ropes, shooting lightning out of their fingers with names like Dark Avenger and Captain Victory. My mother calls Travis the little one, even though he isn't really that little. She looks out the window sometimes and says, "That little one, when he gets older, look out. He'll be the one getting whistles. He will break hearts." When she finally comes out to the car, she has her sunglasses on, and so in the yellow dress, she looks like she's in disguise, a movie star trying not to be recognized. She walks quickly, looking straight ahead, but Mr. Rowley has already gotten up from his lawn chair. "You're looking good, Tina." She keeps walking, so he stays where he is and starts to clap. Kevin and Travis have stopped throwing the knife. They turn around, watching. "Jesus, Tina," Mr. Rowley says, scratching his beard. "From the back, your ass looks like a bell ringing, I swear to God." She gets in the car and shuts the door. "Ding dong," Mr. Rowley yells, still clapping. "Ding ding a dong." The engine starts up, no problem. Frank Sinatra on the stereo singing My Way. She gives the stick shift a good tug, using both hands. There is a loud, straining sound, like someone turning on a vacuum cleaner, but the stick won't move. The Rowleys watch. "Please," she says, her hand on the dashboard. She's talking to the car. "Please." Mr. Rowley walks closer, leaning on his good leg. Travis and Kevin follow and stand behind him, looking at the Volkswagen with serious faces, Kevin still holding the white-handled knife. They're shirtless, both of them, their chests smooth and already tan. My mother is still trying to move the gear shift. It doesn't give, and it doesn't give. Mr. Rowley is still just standing there, waiting for her to let him help. I just need to get it into first, she says finally. She pushes herself up out of her seat. The yellow dress is already wrinkled in the back. It does this when I start it sometimes. Mr. Rowley nods and lowers himself into the car, holding his bad knee with his hand. He steps on the clutch pedal, and the stick moves into first right away, even though he's using only one hand, the ball of muscle in his arm sliding down like the bulge of a mouse inside a boa constrictor. My mother says thank you, not looking at him, but up at the sky. Travis sees me looking at him, and he meets my eyes without smiling before I can look away. Yep, Mr. Rowley says, patting the dashboard. But you need a new clutch. I hope you're not trying to go far. He tells her she will have to put her foot down on the clutch pedal while his foot is still on it, so the car won't stall again. And I can see by her face she's worried this is a trick. She holds on to the door and puts her right foot on the pedal, and Mr. Rowley slides out behind her, using the door as leverage, his hands right next to hers as he pulls himself up. I'm waiting for him to say something, or even worse, but he doesn't. He stretches his good leg out of the car, and then the other. My mother slides back into the seat, the engine humming now, ready to go. We watch Mr. Rowley walk back across the parking lot, Travis and Kevin behind him. He swings his arms, his hands rounded into loose fists. The limp looks like a bounce. The sky is a bright, bright blue, almost turquoise, with no clouds, the sun still high, and I'm excited just to be on the highway, going this fast. I hang my head out the window the way a dog would, the spring breeze blowing hard on my face as we sail along on I-35, past grain elevators and rest stops, clusters of cows behind barbed wire fences, and fields of blue stem grass that look so green I can't stand it. Frank Sinatra is singing I've Got the World on a String for the second time since we left. It's so pretty out I don't care. I knew a girl who fell right out of the car hanging her head out the window like that, my mother says. She went splat. She pulls me back in the car by my arm. Listen, you know we're going to see my father, your grandfather. Okay, I say, but I'm still looking out the window at a red tractor moving slowly along a tan and brown striped field. There are butterflies already, monarchs. Miss Fairchild said the monarchs come through Kansas every spring, millions of them, moving north with the birds. Or maybe the birds move with them. My father and I haven't talked for a while. Evelyn? Are you listening? I look at her and nod. She talks quickly. She says her father is a lot older than Eileen, and that he grew up on a farm in Nebraska. He was in the Korean War before he met Eileen, when Eileen was still just a teenager. He has a Bronze Star because when he was in the war, another man got shot, and my grandfather carried him 7 miles to a hospital. On the way there, he got shot too, but he didn't put the other man down. He's a hard worker, she says, only one hand on the steering wheel now. The other one is up by her mouth, her thumbnail between her teeth. She keeps talking. She has 6 younger brothers and sisters, but only 4 of them will be there today because one of them, Stephen, is in the Army in Virginia, and another one, Teresa, is married in Texas with babies of her own. But I'll meet 4 of them today. She counts them off on her fingers. Daniel, Joe, Stephanie, and Beth. My aunts and uncles, she says. I won't need to call them that, and probably shouldn't. Beth is younger than I am, so that would be a little weird. They live in a nice house. Her father works at Boeing now. He helps make airplanes. Where did the bullet go? In the arm, she says, looking in the rearview mirror. She has it tilted at an angle where she can see her eyes, not the cars behind her. And he's missing a finger. He lost it working in the winter. Frostbite. Which finger? I look down at my hands. His pinky. She wiggles her own pinky at me. Don't stare at it when you see him. I try to imagine it, what he will look like. A 4-fingered hand over his arm where the bullet went in. Nice enough to carry another man when he himself was bleeding. Mean enough to do what he did to Eileen's mouth. But I know I can't really imagine him, the way he will look. It's like trying to imagine my own father. Always someone to make up, knowing that whatever way I try to imagine him, I'm probably wrong, at least about something. Why doesn't he come over to visit like Eileen does? She smiles, tilting her head back and forth. He doesn't like me very much. I watch her face. Why not? Next question, please. She glances up at the mirror. Is he nice? She rubs her lips together. He has a temper. You have a temper. She looks at me. No, I don't. Is he going to talk about Jesus all the time like Eileen? She smiles. Yes, but he likes to talk about God more. Eileen loves Jesus and he loves God. That's why they get along. I hang my arm out the window, waving it in the wind. Who do you love? She laughs, putting her sunglasses back on. I love you, Evelyn. I do. Eileen and my 9-fingered grandfather have a real house and a real yard. The house is green with white trim, on the turnaround of a dead-end street. An American flag hangs in the front, and a tiny gold eagle is perched on the front of their mailbox. One side of the house is 2 stories with a brown front door, and the other side is a 2-car garage. The other houses on their street have this same shape, but they're painted different colors. Some brown, some white, some light yellow with brick. Shade trees rise over the backs of the houses, one with a tire swing hanging down. There are kids riding on bikes and skateboards, none of them wearing pink dresses. 2 women sit on chairs on the lawn next to Eileen's. They look up from their magazines when our Volkswagen pulls into Eileen's driveway, Frank Sinatra floating out the windows. It'll be fine, my mother says, even though I haven't said anything. She holds my hand when we walk up the driveway, her hand tight around mine. The doormat is a picture of Jesus, holding out his arms and smiling, welcome, stamped in cursive over his smiling face. It looks like I'm standing on Jesus, my white shoes on his neck, and this seems like it could bring bad luck. I step off. A boy opens the door. He's tall and thin, all throat and elbows, wearing a mesh football shirt and shorts. The visor of his baseball hat knocks into my mother's forehead when he hugs her. Daniel, oh my God! Oh my God! She holds him away from her, squeezing his shoulders. You've gotten so big! You're taller than I am. Well, shit, Tina, I'm about 17. He bends down and looks at me. He has Eileen's nose and a retainer. Hey, is this my niece? He looks up at my mother. She looks like you. Weird. We follow him inside. There's baby blue carpeting everywhere. 2 girls stretched out on it, playing Chinese checkers. They look up at us, saying nothing. They also have Eileen's bony nose, my mother's dark red curls pulled back from their faces with plastic bands. This is Stephanie, he says, pointing at the older one. This is Beth. Aunt Beth. She could be 8. Daniel makes hand signals for them to stand up, like a policeman waving traffic through a stoplight. They do not stand up, but they smile, and when they do, they look like small, flat-chested versions of my mother. They look more like her than I do. Hi, the older one says. The younger one, Beth, says nothing. She's just a watcher. Hi, my mother says. It's okay if you don't remember us. I came by once when you were still just a baby, Beth. Evelyn was just a toddler, maybe 3. She nods at Stephanie. You two played together, out in the yard, but there's no way you could remember. They say nothing. Daniel comes back, handing each of us a glass of ice water. My mother is smiling in a way that looks like it would hurt if you did it for a long time. I used to babysit him, she says, pointing at Daniel. How do you like that? Another boy walks in the front door, this one younger than Daniel, and he has a dog on a leash. He has the same red hair and the same nose. The dog is a German shepherd with a pink collar, and when it sees me and my mother, it starts barking, its teeth sharp and yellowy white. My mother puts both hands on my shoulders and pulls me behind her. The boy has to hold the pink leash with both hands. No, Rita, no! Stop barking! Daniel takes the leash, dragging the dog away. He uses his foot to push the dog behind a door, shutting it quickly. Guess Rita doesn't know your family, he says, leaning against the door. He smiles, and again there is the metal retainer. But Rita is still barking, throwing her weight against the door, so it sounds like someone kicking. Dad's new dog, he says. My mother looks at the door. Where's Marilyn? He had to put her down. Hip problems. Oh. She looks at the other boy. Well, God, I guess you're Joe. The other boy nods, says hi, and my mother laughs. And then they all 4 just stand there, staring at us like we've just come down from Mars, like we have green heads and noses where our eyes should be. Rita is still barking, growling, trying to sniff us through the small opening under the door. The water that Daniel gave me smells and tastes like soap. My mother clears her throat, her hand on the back of her neck. This is a little strange, isn't it? I know it feels strange for me. Only Daniel smiles back. She turns to him, lowering her voice. Is he here? No, he's still at work, Daniel says. Man, this is going to be intense, isn't it? I hear Eileen's voice from a different room. Is that them? Are they here? She walks into the entryway, carrying a wooden spoon with mashed potatoes on the end of it. When she sees me, she looks down at the dress and makes a squealing sound, leaning down to give me a tight hug. Did you all meet Evelyn? Isn't she just beautiful? All 4 of them look at me carefully, but say nothing. Well, she is stupid, she says, kissing the top of my head. She hands the spoon to Daniel and tells him to go in the kitchen and make sure the potatoes stay warm but don't burn. She tells Beth and Stephanie to set the table. You 2 come with me, she says, and leads us into another room. It's not a kitchen, and there isn't a TV in it, so I'm not sure what it's for. A piano sits in one corner, a gold sofa, and 2 matching chairs in another. Someone has spilled something on the baby blue carpet that's stained, something brown or dark green in the shape of a boot. I sit next to my mother on the gold sofa, little pillows on each side of us. Eileen sits in one of the chairs. I'm just so glad you 2 are here, she says. So glad. She claps her hands and bounces a little, like she's riding in a car on a bumpy road. My mother smiles with her lips together. She looks around the room at the oil painting of the ocean crashing onto rocks above the piano, the gauzy gold curtains in the windows. She picks up one of the pillows, fingering its baby blue fringe. This room is exactly the same, she says. Time warp. Some things are different. Let's hope so. Eileen reaches over to my mother's face, smoothing down her hair. Just be nice, Tina. Just be nice and everything will be okay. I'll be nice if he'll be nice. Eileen frowns. My grandfather is a very big man, broad-shouldered and so tall that he has to duck when he first comes through the door. My eyes go right to where his pinky should be. It's true. There's just a little white stub there, the end smoothed over with pink dimpled flesh. He sees me looking and wiggles it at me before he even says hello. Hi, I say, still looking at the stub.
Hi yourself.
He looks much older than Eileen. A flap of skin hangs between his chin and his neck, and one of his eyes has a red vein zigzagging across the white part. His hair is dark red, cut short like a soldier's. He's wearing a white shirt with a blue striped tie. Rita stands behind him, watching us, no longer barking. This is Evelyn, my mother says. He nods at me, smiling, and then looks back at my mother. It's good to see you again, dear. So grown up. His voice is very low. I can hear the ticking of my mother's watch, her wrist just below my ear, her hand still on my shoulders. He starts to pull on his tie, loosening it, unbuttoning his sleeves and rolling them up. Eileen bulges her eyes at him. I'm glad you've come here today, Tina, he says very slowly. Your mother has missed you. My mother nods, rolling her lips between her teeth. If the whole night goes like this, people speaking so slowly and with such long spaces in between, it will seem like forever. I wish my mother and I were already back at home right now, sitting in front of the television, eating grilled cheese. He clears his throat. You've been missed. Thanks, Dad. She's still standing behind me, her hands heavy on my shoulders. Eileen catches my eye and winks. Beth and Stephanie appear in the doorway. Table set, Stephanie says. Neither of them looks at me. They're both watching my grandfather's face. You girls get a chance to talk to your sister? He asks. And little Evelyn here? They nod, and then it's quiet again. We're all just standing around. If I could think of anything to say, anything at all, I would say it. I can tell by looking at Beth and Stephanie that they're trying to think of something to say too. Beth looks at my mother. Where's the horse? What? My mother asks. My grandfather laughs, then stops quickly. What are you talking about? Beth squints up at him. You said the horse was coming tonight. The little horse. Eileen begins to move toward the kitchen, waving for us to follow. But my mother stays still, her fingers drumming on my shoulders. The little horse? She asks. A little horse was coming? He shakes his head. I don't know what you're talking about, Beth, but that's enough of that. My mother turns her head out the window so she's no longer looking at her father or Eileen, and now I can't see her face. Okay, Eileen says, clapping her hands, a teacher at the end of recess. No more talking about horses, let's go eat. We go into the other room and sit down around the table. It's a table for 6 people, but someone has pulled the piano bench up to the table to make room for 2 more people. My mother and I sit there. Nobody talks. Eileen uses silver tongs to give everyone some salad, and there is sound only when they tap against a plate. But then my grandfather starts laughing about something. When I look up, he winks at me and wrinkles his nose. Well, aren't you just a little pumpkin? He asks. I'm not certain how to answer this. Am I a little pumpkin? I turn to my mother, but her head is bent down as if she were praying with her eyes open, staring at her reflection on her shiny white plate. After a while, he answers for me, still grinning. You are. You're just a little pumpkin. Eileen leaves and comes back with the ham. My grandfather smiles at my mother, but she's still looking down at her plate, so she doesn't see. Eileen puts 2 thick pieces of ham on everyone's plate, so there's ham on one side, salad on the other. I pick up my fork, but my mother pokes my knee under the table, shaking her head no. I'd like to say the grace tonight, my grandfather says. He waits until we have all closed our eyes and bowed our heads, just like Ronald Reagan. But instead of a moment of silence, he talks. He thanks God for getting me and my mother to Wichita safely, and for putting food on the table, and for the roof over our heads. He says thank you for blessed reunions and blessed returns. When he says amen, Eileen looks up at us, her crooked mouth in a wide smile, and she says amen too. Everyone else starts to eat, but my mother is still just looking at her plate, her hands pressed against the seat of her chair. She taps her foot against one of the legs of the table, hard enough so the ice cubes in my glass clink together. My grandfather's temples move as he chews, his eyes wide. He looks at my mother, then glances at Eileen.
Well, I saw that German car out there,
he says.
We can look into fixing it, but it might be better to try to just get you all a new one altogether. Get something a little more reliable.
My mother looks up. Who's the horse? He stops chewing for just a moment, staring at her, but he says nothing, and after a while he starts chewing again, looking down at his plate as if she didn't say anything at all.
Maybe a good Ford. Chrysler.
My mother doesn't look at him. She pretends he isn't there. He looks at me and smiles.
What grade are you in now, sweetheart?
I'm not sure if I should answer, but he's looking at me, waiting. 4th, I say.
4th? Just 1 grade above Beth. How nice.
Who's the horse? My mother asks. He swallows and points his fork at my mother, but doesn't look at her.
Tina, I heard you all needed money, and I'm willing to help you out. Just drop the horse business. Just drop it.
She lowers her head. Daniel and Stephanie catch each other's eye, and something about the way they do this makes me think of the deer in the cornfield across the highway. I got Italian dressing, Eileen says. Tina, for the life of me, I couldn't remember if you liked Italian or ranch. My mother doesn't say anything to this, and so it's quiet for a while, except for the sound of people chewing. Still, she isn't eating, just sitting there. I put a cucumber slice in my mouth, and I'm chewing it as carefully as I can when I hear a high-pitched humming sound, almost like the seatbelt alarm in the Volkswagen. When I look at my mother, the humming gets louder, and I know it's her. People are still chewing, acting like they don't hear, but she gets louder and louder, even with her mouth closed. Finally, the chewing stops. Tina, Eileen says, you okay, honey? My mother closes her eyes and tilts her chin all the way back. She opens her mouth wide, and the humming sound turns into a long, slow whinny. I'm amazed by how good she is at this, how much she sounds like a horse. My grandfather puts down his fork, his face like a rock. She neighs again, and Rita comes out from underneath the table, her ears pointed, tilting her head at the sound. Daniel, will you pass the salad dressing? Eileen asks. That's right, 4th. Just 1 year ahead of Beth and 1 year behind Stephanie. Isn't that something? Isn't that something, Stephanie? Stephanie nods quickly, but my mother neighs again, this time even louder, more high-pitched. Rita starts to whimper, watching her closely.
Drop it, Tina,
my grandfather says.
I'm warning you.
Not a horse, of course, she says, no smile now. You called me a whore. He puts his fork down.
Don't talk like that in my house.
He's speaking softly and quickly, and it's difficult to hear him. You said it! You're the one who said it! She leans back in her chair and laughs, holding out her arms. Thanks for the introduction. He looks at Eileen. Get her to stop. Tina, Eileen reaches over me, almost touching my mother's hand. Tina, please. I'm a mother, she says. I've raised a child by myself, and that's what you have to say about me? Still? She waits, but no one says anything. I feel sorry for you then. I really do. There are veins on my grandfather's forehead that I did not see before. I can see them rising, filling up with blood. He grips the table with both hands, holding on so tightly that his 9 fingers turn white, like the table will fly away from him if he lets go.
Tina,
he says slowly, carefully, still looking at Eileen.
I'm willing to forgive you. I suggest you start to show some appreciation for that, given the present situation you have gotten yourself into.
Forgive me, she says. Oh, that's so big of you. What a nice man you are. Tina, honey. Eileen's voice is just above a whisper, pleading. Let's just try. No. She pulls her hand away, standing up. I gave it a try, but I see that things are the same. Come on, Evelyn, come on. Let's go. We're leaving. She claps the way Eileen did. No more talking about horses. She pulls my chair back from the table, and now we're up, moving quickly down the baby blue carpeted hallway, back toward the front door. I hear his heavy footsteps behind us, his low voice yelling, "This is my house. I'll say what I want when I'm right." But we're already out the door, moving down the stairs to the car. I worry he will chase us, but when we get outside, he stays at the top of the steps, holding on to the little black railing. My mother unlocks my door for me, and once I'm inside, she turns and looks up at him. For a moment, they both stand where they are, staring at each other. He's breathing heavily, his eyes steady on hers.
Then don't come back.
He crosses his arms in front of him and brings them down quickly, like an umpire in baseball. That's it. My mother rolls her eyes. Fuck you, she says, pointing up at him. Fuck you for calling me that. I don't want to come back, okay? The women in the lawn chairs in the other yard have pushed up their sunglasses and put down their magazines. My grandfather holds his hand up like he's going to wave goodbye, but then brings it down, swatting the air like he's sick of us anyway, like he's had enough. I don't know if he thinks I'm a little pumpkin anymore or not, but it doesn't matter. I'm on her side now. He made her cry. He goes back inside, Eileen passing him in the doorway. She touches him on the shoulder and jogs across the yard toward us, her hand over her mouth. Tina, don't leave like this, she says, holding the edge of my mother's window. You don't want to leave it like this. Yes, I do, Mom, okay? Let go. But honey, this might be your last chance. She's speaking softly, reaching into the car to smooth my mother's hair. Come back inside, and the 3 of us can sit down and talk. Tina, in his mind, you did something wrong, okay? But we've been talking a lot, and he wants to forgive. He wants to forgive you, baby. My mother puts her hands in front of her face. There are tears on her neck now, seeping into the collar of the yellow dress. She hiccups, wiping her face on her shoulder. He thinks I'm a bad person, and I'm not. She thumps her hand against her chest and then the steering wheel. And it feels like I'm sick, Mom. It really does. We're leaving, okay? Just let us go. She turns the key in the ignition, and the seatbelt alarm and Frank Sinatra come on. Eileen lets go of the window, giving me a little wave, her other hand cupped over her mouth. My mother pulls on the gear shift once with both hands, and we roll away. The house grows smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, till we turn, and then it's just gone. She can't drive straight. There's a stoplight up ahead on a yellow light, and she steps on the gas, trying to make it, but it turns red long before we get there. We are never going back there, Evelyn, I promise you that, she says, looking up at the light. She wipes her nose with the skirt of her dress. Never again. Okay. I reach over to pat her on the knee. It's okay, Mom. Don't cry. She smiles then. She isn't really crying now, but her nose is still running. She leans over and kisses me on top of my head. Someone honks. The light has turned green. She tries to shift into first, but the gear won't move. More horns. She tugs harder, and again she tries to talk to the Volkswagen like it can hear her. "Come on, baby," she says. Cars start to go around us, people yelling out their windows. Finally, the gear pops into first, engine racing. "Okay," she says, making a sharp turn at the next corner. "We're going to take a shortcut, no more red lights." We turn onto a gravel road, and soon there are no more buildings, just fields of wheat. We drive and drive, going right over potholes, a dead possum. We're going too fast. Rocks kick up and hit the underside of the Volkswagen, like popcorn popping. Suddenly she slows. She leans forward, looking up. "Evelyn, do you see that? Up ahead?" I squint, trying to see. To the left, maybe a quarter of a mile away, there's a whirling blur of something dark, rolling down from the cloudless twilight, like a column of smoke moving down instead of up. What is that? If there were clouds, it could be a tornado. It's that big, moving that quickly. But there aren't any clouds. The day is cooling into night, and already I can see Venus, low on the horizon. The whirling blur is coming from nowhere, like a puff of smoke for something to step out of, a genie or a witch. We get closer, and I can see it's not really a cloud, but a swarm of many small things moving together. Mrs. Stanley said that one time grasshoppers came down from the sky and ate up all the Mormons' crops in Utah, and they almost all starved to death. Eileen told me this had also happened to the Egyptians, only they were called locusts back then, and the Egyptians had deserved it. My mother stops the car. "Oh my God, honey, I think they're birds." I lean my head out my window, pushing up my glasses. She's right. It's some kind of small, dark bird. Thousands of them. Maybe millions. They fall on the field below like rocks, shrieking, covering the still green stalks for as far as I can see, until the field itself looks like it's moving, or like this is the spot where all blackbirds come from, out of a crack in the earth. "Oh my God," my mother says. She says it again as a shadow passes over us, darkening the car. It's more birds, an entire cloud of them, blocking out the sun. They form a stripe across the sky that starts out thin and thickens as they spiral downward, on top of the birds already there. My mother rolls her window the rest of the way down, and we sit and watch, silent. It's like watching lightning. It's beautiful. The sky full of an energy I can feel in my fingers. But I have an uneasy feeling in my stomach, listening to their shrieks. Anything could happen now. The Earth could spin out of its orbit and crash into the moon. We watch. There are too many of them, and I can see now they're fighting one another, pecking one another out of the way. Some of them, the ones on the bottom maybe, the ones who were there first, are maybe getting killed, smashed flat by the weight of all the birds still falling from the sky. Suddenly they begin to slowly funnel back up, forming thick lines again, moving in the opposite direction from where they came. They fly up in waves, in pulses, and I wonder what makes them do this, how they decide who will go when. "Wow," my mother says, and then she says it again. She starts the engine, giving the gear shift a tug. It doesn't move. "No," she says. She tugs again. I try to help. "We can't get stuck here," she says, slapping the dashboard. "No!" But the Volkswagen doesn't hear her. It doesn't feel the slap, and it doesn't care. I look out the window, and there's nothing, not one light on the horizon. And I get the uneasy feeling again. I press my hands together and pray to God to make the Volkswagen move. This does not work. She gives up after a while, turning off the engine, so at least Frank Sinatra will quit singing. "What should we do?" I ask. "I don't know." She looks up at her eyes in the rearview mirror. One of my barrettes has come loose from her hair, dangling down by her ear. "Let me think for a minute." The field to our left is mostly dirt now, picked clean, only a few strips of stalk left over. But the field to our right is untouched, the corn still growing in neat green rows. On the far side of the sky, I see the birds again. Their shadows pass the setting sun before they vanish for good, leaving us behind. Chapter 3. We abandon the Volkswagen, leave it right there on the side of the road, dead and unburied. We walk over a small hill, and then we can see 3 houses, far away from the road and from each other. My mother spends a long time looking at each one, and then points to a white house with a white fence, and says, "That one." It's farther than it looks, and by the time we step on the creaking front porch, there are lightning bugs, the sky dark with night. The lady who answers the door opens it only an inch, just enough to see us with one of her light blue eyes. She says she will call someone for us, but does not invite us in. "Who is it you'd like me to call, dear?" she asks. My mother opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out. "Eileen," I say. My mother shakes her head and writes something on a gum wrapper from her purse. "Could you please call Merle Mitchell? It'll be long distance to Kerrville, I think. I can give you some money." No, the lady says, taking the wrapper. "It's fine." She shuts the door behind her, locks it. I look up at my mother. "She's acting like we're killers." "Well, we could be for all she knows. How is she supposed to know?" I look at our reflection in the window, and I realize that it's true. Neither of us looks like a normal person. I'm still wearing the stupid pink and white dress, and my mother looks a little crazy, the barrette still hanging down by her ear, trails of mascara under her eyes from when she was crying. "That's exactly right," she says. "If ever some people come knocking on our door and I'm not home, I don't want you to let them in either. I don't even want you to answer the door." "But what if their car broke down?" "Too bad for them." The lady opens the door just an inch again and tells us Mr. Mitchell said he would leave right away. "We can wait on the porch," she says. "She'll leave the light on." "Thank you so much," my mother says. "Thank you." The lady shuts the door, opens it again, and asks if she can bring us a bowl of ice cream. I ask what kind, and my mother pinches the back of my elbow. I can see the lady's mouth through the door, her lips bluish and thin. I'm not sure, dear," she says. "I'll have to check and see what we have." My mother says she'll just have a glass of water if that isn't too much trouble. When the door shuts again, she tells me it's rude to ask what kind and that beggars can't be choosers. I'm sick of her saying this to me. "We're not beggars," I say. "Our car just broke down." The lady comes back with a bowl of mint chocolate chip ice cream and a glass of water. And since we're sitting on the steps now, she has to stretch to pass it to us so she can stay inside, keeping one foot behind the door, like a baseball player getting ready to steal home. I tell her thank you, and she smiles. She's younger than I thought she was, wearing an apron over a flowered dress, tennis shoes on her feet. "Say thank you," my mother whispers. "I already said it." "Say it again." I say thank you again. "Certainly," the lady says and shuts the door again. We both look down at the green ice cream. "I don't like mint chocolate chip," I say. My mother nods. "Yes, I know. It's the only kind I don't like." She closes her eyes. "Yes, Evelyn, I know." She says she will eat the ice cream if I won't, and that when Mr. Mitchell comes, we can ask him to take us someplace to eat, as long as his wife isn't with him. If his wife is with him, she says, we won't say anything at all. "Why not?" "Because I said so." She points up at the sky. "Look, see that up there? That's the Big Dipper." She's telling me this like she's teaching me something new, but of course I know the Big Dipper. It's the easiest one. I also know the Little Dipper, Cassiopeia, and Orion's Belt. Miss Fairchild said the stars in the constellations are not really close together. It only looks that way because they're so far away from us. They only make shape if you're looking at them from Earth. If you were looking at the Big Dipper from another solar system, she said, it would look like something else. Or maybe like nothing at all. I can hear cicadas from the field across the road, the sound a plastic straw makes when you bend it, back and forth, back and forth. Moths circle the porch light over our heads, and I watch them, my head resting in my mother's lap. They're like the birds, fluttering and flapping on top of one another, trying to get inside. The bottom of the bulb is dark with the silhouettes of moths already dead, their wings still against the glass. I wake to headlights shining on my face, the sound of Mr. Mitchell's truck. He kills the engine and steps out, squinting to see us on the porch. "Oh, Merle," my mother says. "Thank you so much. I'm sorry we had to call you out here. Come on, Evelyn, it's time to go." "Don't be sorry," he yells. Even when Mr. Mitchell yells, it's in a nice way, the way Santa Claus yells ho 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 outside of Walmart at Christmas. "What the hell are you all doing sitting outside is what I'd like to know. Didn't they let you wait inside?" My mother puts a finger to her lips. "Shh, it's just an older woman. She was scared, I think." He picks me up and carries me down the steps of the porch, my mother walking behind us. "Come on, squirrel," he says. "We'll get you home." I squint into the headlights and see the outline of someone sitting in the passenger seat. It's a woman, Mr. Mitchell's wife. She gets out of the truck to let us in, and I see she is short, halfway between my mother and me, broad shoulders. Her hair is cut close around her head, like a little hat, and she looks at us with small, staring eyes. "Hello," my mother says. "Thank you so much for coming all the way out here. This is my daughter, Evelyn." Mrs. Mitchell smiles quickly at me. Her small eyes stay on my mother, even as she leans down to pop the front seat of the truck forward for us. I get in behind the driver's seat next to a bag of dog food. My mother sits behind Mrs. Mitchell, her legs folded, her chin resting on her knees. Mr. Mitchell jogs around the front of the truck and slides in, whistling. "So, Tina, what do you think happened?" He looks over his shoulder while he backs out of the driveway, and when he catches my eye, he winks. "The clutch gave out. I can't get it into first. I knew it was going to happen, but I thought I could make it to Wichita and back." "Why didn't you tell me you needed a car? I would have loaned you the truck." Mrs. Mitchell makes a quick hissing sound with her tongue, like water sprinkled on a hot pan. We drive on in silence until the back of the Volkswagen appears in the headlights. "Do you want me to take a look at it?" Mr. Mitchell asks, pulling up behind it. "I could try to fiddle with the clutch a bit." Mrs. Mitchell turns on the overhead light and holds her watch up underneath it. "Oh, that's okay, Merle," my mother says. "I feel bad enough dragging you both out here." Mr. Mitchell says, "Don't be ridiculous." But Mrs. Mitchell says nothing. From where I sit, I can see only one side of her face, gray and unmoving. She's looking straight ahead, squinting at the white Volkswagen Bug. "It's our car," she says, like no one else knows this. She looks at Mr. Mitchell with her small eyes. "You gave them our car?" Mr. Mitchell gets out of the truck, letting the door slam behind him. We watch him pop open the back of the Volkswagen and stand there, looking at it and shaking his head. I'm scared to talk. Mrs. Mitchell is not saying anything, but something about her, something invisible coming out of the back of her head like ultraviolet rays, makes me scared to move. Even my head, even my mouth. My mother isn't moving either. Mrs. Mitchell reaches up to the rearview mirror, tilting it so she can see my mother's face. "So, Tina," she says. The way she says this makes it sound like just my mother's name is something bad, something you don't want to be called. "You don't have any family or anyone who could have come and picked you up?" My mother waits so long to answer that at first I think she won't. Then she clears her throat and says, "Well, if I had, I suppose I would have called them." "I suppose. How long have you been working for Merle?" "About 4 years." Out of the corner of my eye, I can see my mother is actually biting her tongue, the pink tip of it sticking out from between her teeth. She reaches over the front seat and opens Mr. Mitchell's door. "Let me out, Evelyn." I get out quickly, shutting the door behind us. "No," she says, "you get back in. I need to talk to Mr. Mitchell." "With her? No way." "Get in now." I get back in the car. Mrs. Mitchell and I watch my mother walk over to Mr. Mitchell, her body making a shadow like the number 8 in the headlights. I'm hungry, and I'm sick of this day. If I were at home, I would be in bed by now, asleep, or reading Nancy Drew, my teeth brushed, my hair wet from the shower. They shouldn't have left me in the car alone with Mrs. Mitchell. The keys are still in the ignition. She could drive away, take me with her. "So, Evelyn." "It's Evelyn, isn't it?" she asks, turning around, smiling with only her mouth. "Why did you all go to Wichita?" "To see Eileen." "Who's Eileen?" "My grandmother." My mother and Mr. Mitchell are both peering into the engine of the car, winged insects swirling around their heads. My mother says something and he laughs. "So where's your daddy?" "Huh? Your father. Where is he?" I shrug my shoulders. I don't want to talk to her anymore. She clicks her tongue, frowns. "Do you know who your daddy is, honey?" I stare at her. She stares back, the muscles in her face tight and still. She reaches over the seat and tries to pat me on the hand. She has a diamond ring, a white flicker in the darkness. "You poor thing," she says. "It's not your fault." Mr. Mitchell and my mother walk slowly back to the truck, Mr. Mitchell with his hands in his pockets, looking down at his feet. When Mrs. Mitchell gets out of the car to let my mother in, she doesn't look at my mother, and my mother doesn't look at her. "If that car was a horse, I'd have shot it long ago," Mr. Mitchell says, starting up the truck's loud engine. "Even if you get the clutch figured out, the transmission's bound to go next." "Well," my mother says, "at least it got me to work." "Yeah, I'll give you a ride until we can find something else for you." My mother says thank you, but it's difficult to hear her because Mrs. Mitchell makes another hissing sound. Mr. Mitchell turns toward her, braking the truck so quickly that we all slide forward and then jerk back. He and Mrs. Mitchell look at each other, unblinking, for maybe 3 seconds. But it seems longer, sitting in the back seat. Now I know my mother shouldn't have called Mr. Mitchell for a ride, even if it meant we had to hitchhike or call the police. Now Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell are in a fight, staring at each other right in front of us like they hate each other, even though they're married. I've seen my mother and Eileen look at each other like this, eyes flat, mouths unmoving, a long stare that looks like hate, but could be something else, nothing you want to get in between.